Hey guys, it's the Metal 5, and as you may know, I have done an overabundance of responses to Game Theory, and even did a top 10 worst Game Theory videos countdown last year, in which I presented the possibility of doing a top 10 best Game Theory videos to show people that MatPat can make good theories, and I don't hate him. I may not be a fan of the series anymore, but I will still admit that there are good episodes. So of me writing the script around just over a year since I made the worst theories video, I think it's a good time that I jumped on that possibility. But of course, before I get into the entries themselves, I do need to explain the criteria for this list. For requirements, all it has to be is any episode of Game Theory that is an actual theory. So videos such as Why I Gave the Pope Undertale and The Hunt for the Smash Bros. Lost Stage won't be included just because while they are titled as Game Theory, they aren't actual theories. Plus, admittedly, this list will be partially influenced by my own personal preference as well, since some of the entries on this list I have included either because I enjoy watching them or thinking about the idea. So this is kind of a mixture between a best and favorite videos list. And lastly, it of course just has to be a good theory where there aren't at least any major issues that I could find. Or if any potential issues may be present, they can easily be worked around or further explained to make them more believable. Finally, one disclaimer I want to make for this video is that this will probably end up being shorter than my worst videos list, not because I'm saying Game Theory is more often bad than good or anything like that, but just because I find that it takes much less time to explain why something is good or enjoyable than it is to explain why something's bad, especially since I think these theories are good, so I don't have to spend time pointing out flaws, unlike in my worst videos list, where each entry was essentially a mini response video or an abridged/updated version of my response video in relation to the theories that I had already covered in their own videos. Plus, I haven't seen every episode of Game Theory, so there might be some good ones that I've missed. But now that I've explained everything, it's time that I help Game Theory get out of that constant bad rep that it's been getting, which I have regrettably been responsible for to some extent, by pointing out the good parts of the series. Now cue the intro! The One Universe Theory. Oh boy, this is a blast from the past, as not only is this a very early Game Theory episode back from 2012, but it was also one of the first Game Theory videos I had ever seen, and has ended up becoming a somewhat popular theory, as several other theory channels have attempted to do similar things, whether it be focusing on one specific company such as Nintendo, or every single form of fiction imaginable. As you can guess from the name of this theory, the hypothesis is that all video games exist within one shared universe due to the existence of things such as cameos, Easter eggs, and guest character appearances in other games creating a link. But wait, there's more! As this theory also connects video games to the real world through games involving real-life figures such as Mike Tyson and Tony Hawk. So, to summarize everything covered in this video, we start off with Super Mario RPG, which then links to Metroid, which then connects to Kirby, StarCraft, and Kid Icarus, but Super Mario RPG also connects to Legend of Zelda. Then the entire Mario series connects to the obscure Japanese-only Nintendo game Captain Rainbow, which brings us to Punch-Out, which features both Mike Tyson and Donkey Kong, the latter of which links to Banjo-Kazooie through the power of beavers. Then Mike Tyson connects Punch-Out to Street Fighter due to Balrog's Japanese name, and then Street Fighter links to the game Cannon Spike, which features Cammy and other Capcom characters, including BB Hood from Darkstalkers. Then Darkstalkers is connected to Gunbird due to Morrigan making a guest appearance, which also features Alucard from Castlevania. Then Castlevania links to Snatcher, which then links to Contra, then to Sparkster the Rocket Knight, then to Goemon, then to Yu-Gi-Oh!, which then connects to Metal Gear Solid, leading to Ape Escape, then Golf, with that finally leading to God of War since Kratos has some weird hobbies. It would take a really long time to explain every single thing that connects these franchises together and to the real world, but I think you get the idea. The only potential issue I can find with this theory is due to the existence of crossover games which commonly involve characters passing between dimensions, in which the same could apply with all these connections, but there is a workaround for that, as you could use one game's links which doesn't involve dimension hopping to inadvertently link it to another through the different pathways. Plus, many crossovers are non-canon to begin with, so you can also use that as a counter-argument. Besides, the main reason why this theory is on the list is just because I like the idea of trying to place all games in one universe through all sorts of different connections. And while this theory is extremely unlikely to actually be true, MatPat has said that he doesn't necessarily believe all of his theories, in which case they're just presenting a different perspective, which is what I see this as. I mean, hell, Noggin decided to continue this, which has resulted in a gigantic crossover web, and there's many more connections that people can still make. That kinda speaks volumes of how interesting an idea this theory is. The only reason why it isn't higher is just because this episode kind of borders between an actual theory and just examining cameo appearances in video games, but it's still good nonetheless. Which link rules them all? Admittedly, the Versus Show fan in me is a factor into why this theory is on the list, but I still think this theory is good regardless. This theory is effectively a debate and analysis in order to determine which incarnation of Link, across all incarnations present in the Zelda series at the time this video was uploaded, is the strongest and would win in a fight if all the versions went up against each other. So, in the red corner, we have the chosen hero from Skyward Sword, and in the many other corners, it is the hero of Minish from Minish Cap, Four Swords Link, adult and child hero of time from Ocarina of Time, plus Majora's Mask for the latter, the hero of Legend from A Link to the Past and the Game Boy games, new hero of Hyrule from A Link Between Worlds, old hero of Hyrule from the original Legend of Zelda N2, hero of Twilight from Take a Guess, hero of Light from Four Swords Adventure, hero of Wind from Take Another Guess, plus Phantom Hourglass, and lastly the hero of Trains from Spirit Tracks. Holy crap, I forgot how many links there were. Many factors are used to help determine which link is the strongest, such as physical strength, arsenal, experience, and even underwater maneuverability, which I think MatPat makes a good case about which Link excels in the different categories, such as Twilight Princess Link being the best marksman and having the best sword skills, the latter due to him learning from the hero's shade, as well as A Link to the Past Link possessing the most experience due to having the most games, but ultimately the winning Link is determined to be Young Link. When I first saw this theory, I was so confused how Young Link won when most categories went in favor of Twilight Princess and A Link to the Past, but then MatPat brought up Majora's Mask, and I went, oh, now I get it. Because the transformation masks give him both greater variety of abilities, along with excelling in all of the categories. Also, there's the Fierce Deity Mask, which might as well just be gods, along with how Young Link eventually becomes the hero Shade who taught Twilight Princess Link the sword techniques in the first place. So, there's that. So, ultimately, I do agree with the outcome of this theory, since MatPat does use a lot of information and explanations to back up his reasoning, and I've always wondered myself which Link would be the strongest, so even just the concept is what made me find this episode so appealing. Why Final Fantasy is anti-religion? Admittedly, when I first came across this theory back around the time when I first came across game theory, I thought that I was gonna hate it because I was expecting some sort of SJW or preaching being like, video games cause violence and present holiness and goodwill nature of religion as being evil, like what some people say about Pokemon, but that isn't the case. In this theory, MatPat analyzes various examples of Final Fantasy games in which the villain or some evil organization within the game reflects some form of religious aspect or organized religion. For example, in Final Fantasy X, a religion is created to oppose industrialization and technology, essentially the Amish, and involves worshipping Yevon, a corrupt religious leader who transformed into the monster Sin and threatens to destroy cities if they don't, in order to prevent themselves from being killed. Furthermore, the villain of Final Fantasy X, Seymour, is basically the Pope and wants to stop Sin from killing everybody by becoming Sin and killing everyone. Because that makes sense. Other examples include how, in the final battle against Kefka in 6, the different phases of the fight hold references to the different stages of the afterlife in Dante's Inferno, as well as Jesus and the Virgin Mary, along with Kefka appearing as an angel. And in the obscure Final Fantasy Legends game for the Game Boy, the penultimate boss is Ashura, who is a Hindu and Buddhist deity, and then you kill the creator of the universe. The religious references in Final Fantasy are very clear, and most of the games with these references place them in the position of the villains. But why is this the case? Well, that takes me over to why I like this theory, being that Gaijin Goomba makes an appearance, and reveals that the reason why Final Fantasy is anti-religion is because in Japan, the population often practices a mixture of religion, such as being born and raised under Shinto practices and temples, performing Christian weddings and having Buddhist funerals, rather than conforming to one sole religion, meaning that they view absolute organized religion differently due to it being uncommon, which is why it's presented as the bad guys. It's an interesting thing to learn about, and I'm glad this video didn't devolve into Final Fantasy corrupts young minds, in which MatPat actually kind of calls out those kind of religious leaders. Shit like that is partially the reason why I'm an atheist. Solving Raticate's death. Now, you could argue this is more of a debunking video rather than an actual theory, but it does go into more theory territory near the end when solving the mystery, which is why I decided to include it. So, this theory attempts to find the truth behind the popular theory from Pokemon Red and Blue, being that you kill your rival's Raticate in the battle against him on the SS Anne, due to the fact that it never appears again, and your next rival battle takes place in the Pokemon Tower, which is a cemetery. Despite MatPat finding various evidence proving ways in which the Pokemon can die across the games, anime, and manga, such as old age, eating each other, self-sacrifice, and most importantly through battling, in which Pokeballs don't help, which plays the biggest role in supporting the initial theory. However, MatPat debunks the theory afterwards by showing a crucial detail which most people, including myself, completely missed, being that in the battle on the SS Anne, Gary/Blue/Asshat Raticate is level 16, after the previous battle, in which it was a level 15 Rattata. However, Rattata doesn't evolve into Raticate until level 20, meaning that the Raticate you fight has to be a different Pokemon that he caught, meaning that he also has the ability to switch out Pokemon. As such, it suggests that it's far more likely that he just removed Raticate from his party rather than it dying. Plus, a further point to back up this argument that I found was that there have been cases in the Pokemon games in which you can catch evolved Pokemon with levels lower than that in which they evolve, along with how the only cases of Pokemon evolving prematurely have been with wild Pokemon and not those that have already been caught. Personally, I've never been a fan of the dead Raticate theory just because I thought it relied too much on making things up. For example, it says the reason why Raticate died was because it was badly injured and Gary/Blue/Asshat couldn't get it to the Pokemon Center in time because the SSM was crowded, when there's no proof of that. Plus, since he only cares about being strong, I find it far more likely that he would just get rid of Raticate since it has low stats. So, admittedly, I am kind of happy that there exists some evidence that goes against the theory, but if you believe it, then that's fine. Your rival must have just pulled a Getsis before it was cool. How to win at love, according to dating sims. The title already says what the series is about. MatPat examines various dating sims, such as Honey Pop, and compares them to real-life psychological, sociological, and dating-related studies to show how playing dating sims can actually help to get a date in real life and to stay in a long-term relationship with somebody, regardless of what gender you may be. This is a two-part theory, with the first part more focusing on going out with someone, while the second part is more focused towards staying in that relationship for the long haul. So, as such, there is a lot of information in this theory, so I won't be able to cover all of it since it would make this entry go on way too long, and it's only number 6. It doesn't deserve that much screen time. The main reason why I think this theory is good is because the points that MatPat brings up, such as avoiding misspelt or shy-sounding responses in dating sims, reflecting how you need to be confident when you talk to a girl, or guy, depending on your sexual preference, and how giving gifts helps them to like you by showing your generosity but not over-giving because it makes you appear to have low self-esteem, makes a lot of logical sense. Well, I'm not saying anything along the lines of, oh, this theory is just basic shit we already know, but rather it helps make the theory more believable through the use of easy-to-understand and grasp ideas about dating to not make you look like a stalker. Especially when this theory also acts as essentially dating advice. Plus, while I myself have noticed a few parallels between dating sims and real-life dating, well, from what I've seen of dating anyway, I never realized how many parallels there actually were, considering that at first glance, some dating sims appear to tell us that in order to be successful on a date and to have sex, you need to match up colored orbs. Additionally, another thing I like about this fairy is that it gives me flashbacks to classic game theory, in which MatPat used maths and scientific studies to back up his points rather than wearing a tinfoil hat. Through the mentioning of studies and statistics present across this entire theory relating to dating and social interaction. I mean, we even get a few big, complicated words used, such as propinquity. I think it would be better to just watch it yourself rather than listening to someone trying to briefly explain it. And yes, I will admit that the only reason why I ended up watching this theory in the first place is because I'm a lonely fuck who gets super nervous around attractive girls. Not that this would end up helping, because I'm pretty much just Austin Powers, but without the mojo. Hello Neighbor's satanic plots. So with Hello Neighbor creating many theories in relation to what the neighbor is doing, or the possibility that he might not be evil and it's just a misunderstanding, MatPat throws his hat into the ring by suggesting that the neighbor made a deal with the devil and has to kidnap women and children in order to fulfill his end of the bargain. Aside from potentially determining that the neighbor used to work in the circus due to promotional art portraying him as a clown and due to his house containing many carnival-themed features, MatPat uses a lot of references to the Bible to show the neighbor's connection to the devil, such as the fact that his mailbox depicts two 14s separated by a colon. This references several verses in the Bible, which are Kings 14:14, mentioning the freeing of hostages from a palace, and Isaiah 14:14, which has the devil himself saying that he will ascend back to heaven after being banished by God. Furthermore, MatPat finds that in another promotional image of the game, the neighbor is shown to possess the book Faust, which is a German story about an old man who sells his soul to the devil to gain ultimate knowledge, along with the number 666 being present on the neighbor's shoe, plus his basement in the alpha build being reminiscent of satanic rituals. There are a lot of clear connections to the devil and the Bible present within the game, meaning that it has to mean at least something. But the biblical references continue as MatPat made a short follow-up video to this theory, which pointed out how the odd painting of the neighbor with some other guy could be a reference to a painting depicting Judas, one of the 12 apostles, betraying Jesus by kissing him due to having his desires tainted by the devil, and the gold bull on the neighbor's mug in the Faust image possibly being a reference to the golden calf from Exodus, in which the people following Moses created a false god to worship. Again, there's kind of a lot to go over when explaining this theory in regards to the evidence, so I have to cut out some things to save time. But you get the picture of how there's so many connections within Hello Neighbor that lead towards stories about the devil himself, pawns of the devil, and people worshipping beings other than God, that it can't just be a coincidence. Which is why I think this is a good theory, since there's so much overwhelming evidence to back up the hypothesis. Super Smash Bros. Tragic hidden lore. I notice MatPat likes to include words in all caps in a lot of his theory's titles. This theory states that the child who plays with the toys of the Smash Bros. Characters in which the fights take place in his imagination, and represents Master Hand and Crazy Hand, is actually Masahiro Sakurai, and that the entire backstory of Smash Bros. Is based on Sakurai's personal struggle with being a game designer. So first, MatPat determines the age of the kid as being around 12 and 64, then in his later teens in Melee, and then a young adult in Brawl, in which the final boss, Taboo, represents the social stigma that is attached towards adults playing with toys. Then, after revealing that Sakurai is the kid, according to this theory, MatPat applies the different scenarios within the first few games to Sakurai's life. Sakurai was 13 years old when the Nintendo Famicom was released, which kickstarted Nintendo becoming one of the major players in the video game industry. This matches up with the estimated age of the kid in 64, where he plays with his toys of Nintendo characters due to being a fan. Then Sakurai created Kirby when he was 19, but later left HAL Laboratories when Kirby started to become too sequelized and wanted to work on other things. Not only does this match with the supposed age of the kid in Melee, but the introduction of Crazy Hand in Melee could also be a reference to Sakurai's frustration with too many sequels as Smash Bros. Started to go down the same path. Then with Brawl and Taboo, MatPat states that it represents Sakurai coming to grips with his career choice as a game designer, where he makes games and toys despite society saying that adults shouldn't do that. Then lastly, Wii U and 3DS, with the battle against Mastercore, represents Sakurai's struggle with developing games because of them requiring huge amounts of commitment, and due to the previously mentioned desire to work on other projects but not wanting someone else to take over control of his creation, in which he gives up. I find it to be a very interesting perspective on the series, and since it uses actual facts from Sakurai's life, and the stress of developing Wii U and 3DS, which I had heard of up to the game's release, I can't argue against that since I know it's true. Now, to address the elephant in the room, this theory is very similar to a theory made by Noggin, but in his case he believes Smash Bros. Take place in the mind of an autistic kid. I think that both theories are really good, but I think the game theory is more likely to be true in the end just because Sakurai does like to have some of his personal beliefs affect the development of Smash Bros. Games, like how he didn't include a story mode after Brawl due to the cutscenes being uploaded to YouTube. Who is Gaster? This is a 3-part theory in which MatPat actually released the final parts, where the first part and half of part 2 mainly focus on analyzing the known information about Gaster and Undertale, and how he got shattered across time and space, while the second half of part 2 and all of part 3 focus on the conclusion of the theory, which states that Sans and Papyrus are actually the two halves of Gaster that was shattered and then transformed into the separate living beings. When it comes to presenting how Sans and Papyrus could be Gaster, MatPat uses research on how the left and right sides of the brain work, in which the left is analytical while the right is creative. This is reflected with Sans and Papyrus, with how Sans prefers word and language-based challenges and loves to make puns, which are functions performed by the left side of the brain, while Papyrus likes visual challenges whilst finding language-based ones challenging, and is also an optimist due to having dreams of being in the Royal Guard. Of course, this falls in line with the right side. Furthermore, Sans is left-handed while Papyrus is right-handed, as potentially a form of symbolism to represent their positions as the separate parts of Gaster's brain, as well as the fact that Sans and Papyrus are each named after one font, while Gaster is named after 2. Added on to this is the fact that MatPat also shows how Papyrus is aware of different timelines, just like Sans, with him being aware of Sans' time and space abilities, and referring to the ending in which he doesn't join the Royal Guard as being the worst possible one. This again falls in line with him being part of Gaster due to him being blasted across multiple timelines. Lastly, MatPat points out how it's potentially hinted that Papyrus possesses a Gaster Blaster, which is a weapon with a clear connection to Gaster that Sans also has access to, as it's what he uses in the boss battle against him. There have been quite a few episodes of game theory that I think are good, but I don't necessarily believe the theory because I can't see the game developers actually doing it. But this theory I actually do legitimately believe could be the case, as there's so many things related to Sans and Papyrus that connect to Gaster, the different functions of the left and right sides of the brain, and the knowledge of different timelines. On top of the fact that their vague backstory of just showing up can be explained by them popping into existence from time and space, and that some of the evidence came from a patch which Toby Fox himself added into the game, I think this theory could have a strong chance of being true. The only issue I could find is in part 2, where Gaster's research entry is stated to be talking to Sans and Alphys, but how could Sans exist before Gaster's been shattered? But I don't see that as a major issue, just because it can easily be covered up by saying that instead, Gaster could be referring to Sans and Papyrus just before he is shattered, as you have to hack the game in order to find that entry, meaning that it likely has also been displaced across multiple universes. But to talk about the one thing I'm pretty sure that's on everybody's mind when it comes to this theory. At the beginning of part 1, MatPat has this section where he talks about the hate that his previous Undertale videos got, and I've seen a lot of people slamming him for this. Honestly, I'm on MatPat's side when it comes to this. All I got from that section was that MatPat found the hate on the Undertale videos to be a massive downer, just because he felt so passionate to talk about them since he loves Earthbound and Undertale. And I feel that some people have just completely manipulated everything he said and the meaning behind his words to make it sound like he can't take criticism when he clearly stated otherwise. But These are also the same people who act like MatPat still thinks the Sans is necessarily as good when, again, he stated otherwise. The clue that solves FNAF. I mentioned that I think that this theory is really good in the past, so now it's time that I went into more detail as to why I like it. So this theory states that the entire story of Five Nights at Freddy's is that it was all just a dream in the mind of the crying child from FNAF 4. This idea stems from some very weird clues that Scott Cawthon left in the middle of a live stream MatPat did with other FNAF theorists, which all leads to things in the real world that manifest in what appears in the pizzerias if they are just a dream. For instance, one clue asked why the tiny toy Chica that this one random girl in FNAF 4 has is missing its beak, which then reflects Toy Chica in FNAF 2 of how her beak suspiciously goes missing after leaving the stage. Thus, it suggests that the toy animatronics are based on the toys that this girl plays with. Then it continues from there, with FNAF 1 being based on the Fredbear and Friends TV show and the plushies of the FNAF 1 animatronics plus psychic friend Fredbear, showing why Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy are the specific animatronics that appear in the first game, along with Foxy's jump scare being based on how the FNAF 4 kid's brother scares him with the Foxy mask. Similar things even apply to animatronics like Springtrap and Balloon Boy, who are based on a puppet that constantly traps a girl's finger and a kid holding a balloon respectively. This theory also covers some of the more confusing aspects of the FNAF series like Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, being that they're based on the shadows cast by Fredbear and Springtrap when they're on stage. And even the purple guy works into it, as the moment in FNAF 4 where you see him putting on an employee's costume can be explained as the kid misinterpreting it as him forcefully stuffing someone into the suit. But what really sold me on this theory was how MatPat pointed out that in the first 3 games, when you finish a night, the sound that plays is that of a grandfather clock dinging to tell you to wake up. My mind was blown at this part, because it made all the pieces fall together, on top of the fact that the sheer connections between the other games and what the FNAF 4 kid sees were too absurd to be just a coincidence. Especially considering how said grandfather clock is located right outside the kid's room in both his dream and in the minigame sequences. Furthermore, in FNAF 4, the clock that plays is instead that of a digital alarm clock that you would find in a hospital, showing that the kid is dreaming while in the hospital after being bitten by Fredbear. But what drives this theory home even more is that when talking about 4, Scott even mentioned that the contents of the box were the truth behind the story, but he was unsure if the community would accept it, which falls perfectly in line with how "it was all a dream" storylines are huge cop-outs that piss off a lot of people. The only issue with this theory is that the idea of FNAF being a dream doesn't explain some things such as the puppet, but MatPat acknowledges that himself. And I think it's impossible to try and solve FNAF without a few things not being explained because it's so confusing. I mean, when I made my theory on who Purple Guy is, there were some things that I also couldn't fit into place. So, even after the ridiculousness of Gaster's identity and FNAF being a dream, in which so many pieces of information fall into place when going off the hypothesis, what could possibly beat them? Well, not only is this a theory that I like and think is very good because the evidence presented makes it very believable, but also because I don't think there was any better option for the best game theory than this one, due to the fact that this theory basically ended up becoming true and is now treated as canon by fans of the series. The Pokemon Multiverse explains everything. I had to put off seeing this theory because it goes into spoiler territory for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but I was glad that I came back to it after being the Delta episode. This theory presents the idea that all of the Pokemon games, including the separate versions of each generation and the remakes, are their own dimension in which they all exist as part of a gigantic multiverse, and thus MatPat uses this explanation to answer some of the bigger confusing questions about the Pokemon series, such as why Mega Evolution wasn't present prior to Gen 6, and the similarities and differences between each individual versions of the games. Within the Delta episode, a device is created using the infinite energy generated from Megastones to rip a hole through reality and send the meteor containing Deoxys to another dimension, in which Zinnia destroys the controller because using it would mean the destruction of another world, clearly hinting that parallel universes are a thing within Pokemon. MatPat explains this through the multiple worlds theory and the example of AZ using the ultimate weapon. Within the lore of Gen 6 and potentially beyond, AZ fires the ultimate weapon as revenge for the Pokemon fighting in the war killing his Floette. But going off of the multiple worlds theory, there exists an alternate dimension in which AZ didn't fire the weapon. As the firing of the ultimate weapon led to the creation of Mega Stones, this would suggest that there's a universe in which Mega Evolution doesn't exist, which would account for the games prior to Gen 6 before Mega Evolution became a mechanic in the series. This is again backed up by Zinnia, who mentions the existence of a Hoenn region that is similar but different, with the specific example of Mega Evolution being unknown, clearly referring to the original Ruby and Sapphire where Mega Evolution wasn't a thing. Plus, similarly to the previous entry, this really had another mind-blowing piece of evidence for me, being that the device used to connect universes together is called the Link Cable, which shares its name with the cable needed to trade Pokemon in the Game Boy games, suggesting that trading Pokemon is actually you transporting it to another dimension, which supports the idea that each version is its own dimension, with the differences being what Pokemon you can find and what legendary the evil team chooses to go after. But like I said before, not only is there so much backing up this theory with Zinnia's dialogue and the link cable, but this theory has effectively become canon. Not just due to the game making it clear that Pokemon Multiverse is a thing, but also because if you look up other Pokemon theorists such as Birdkeeper Toby, then you will see them also bring up the Pokemon Multiverse as a point to back up their own theories. It's an idea that just makes way too much sense in explaining all the weird differences between Pokemon versions and remakes. Since this theory has had so much influence on the understanding of the Pokemon series, and which many fans now, and even myself, consider it to be a canon fact about the Pokemon series, there clearly wasn't a better choice for the best game theory episode, seeing as how could any other theory at this point in time possibly beat the one that effectively ended up being true?